Right. Well, I hope you'll excuse me if I sit down to talk to you. I feel so much more comfortable that way.
So do I, Colin.
Right. Well, you all know the famous statement of George Mallory when asked why did he want to climb Everest. He said it's because it was there. I've got a better answer for people who ask me why I want to go on expeditions. I go because somebody asked me to go. And in 1960, all the top New Zealand climbers were off to the Himalaya for the Snowman series of expeditions. And they were passing through Sydney on their way to India. And I called in at Mascot, where they were changing planes, to say hello to them. And I got into the VIP lounge where they were being interviewed by all sorts of journalists and photographers. And when the journalists had given up a bit, Ed Hillary of Everest and Norm Hardy of Kanchenjunga grabbed me and pushed me into a corner. And they said, "Do you want to lead an expedition?" So I said, "Yes, where's it going to?" Well, where it was going to, of course, was West New Guinea, where there are numerous very high mountains, most of them rock mountains, but as you can see there's a bit of snow and ice too, and scarcely any of them had been looked at, let alone climbed. And the highest one of all, the Carstensz Pyramid, was, still is, the highest thing between the Himalaya and the Andes. And the idea was that before the Dutch handed over to the Indonesians, it might be a good idea to get somebody in there and have a go at climbing it, or at least find a way to it. Because the Indonesians were not likely to encourage mountaineering expeditions for some years, and they didn't. Why was I asked to do the job? Well, there were two groups of people, one from Christchurch and the other from Auckland, who had both approached the Alpine Club saying, "We want to go and climb this thing." So the Alpine Club had to pick somebody who knew both parties, who didn't come from Christchurch or Auckland, and that was me. Well, there were 6 of us altogether, and we made our preparations with a tremendous amount of airmail and 1 or 2 phone conversations, and all the usual things happened, like the vital maps being lost by the post office, that kind of thing. We built our own radio transmitters and put new handles in our ice axes, generally got ourselves ready, sent stuff up to Dutch New Guinea, and then we all went up there. And we immediately found it wasn't going to be easy, because we found that it was terribly hard to get hold of an aeroplane to take us into our area or to drop our supplies for us. And we found that, in fact, we were unpopular simply because we were an expedition, and 2 expeditions had been in there recently who had more or less misconducted themselves. They'd upset the natives terribly, and the missionaries particularly, and the Dutch government too, would rather not have expeditions. However, we talked them around to the point where we could get air transport to place a mission station called Tiom, which was only a couple of 100 miles away from our objective, and we could walk from there with some native carriers to help us carry our gear. So we flew into Tiom, and we had a crash course of about 15 minutes with the missionary there, learning the Dani language. The most important word we learnt was lek, which means no. And then we got some really good native carriers. They were great blokes, and we loaded ourselves up, 40-pound loads for the natives, 60 for us, and away we went up the Malaria River. And at first our way was on a native track alongside the river with native swing bridges across the river here and there, and plenty of villages. We could buy native food with shells and beads and things, and the climate was nice and dry and everything was lovely for a couple of days. Well, we came to the place where we had to leave the river and climb over a mountain range, and we waded across the river. It was getting small up there. We must have been about 9,000 feet above sea level, and we were climbing up the bank and heading up the hillside where the native track went up to the crown of the range, and suddenly there were all these great big wooden arrows about that long, no feathers on them, but barbs all the way from the front to the back, flying through the air in our direction. And of course naturally I dodged behind a stone, a big stone, and so did everybody. And our native carriers quickly grabbed our ice axes to defend us. And meanwhile, these people who were attacking us had thought that we were unarmed, because my shotgun was knocked down into bits and in the bottom of my pack. So I beat the world's record for rapid assembly of a shotgun, stuffed around into the breach, and came up firing small birdshot at their ankles, which made them leap in the air and yell. So that was good. But then I tried to put a second round in, and I'd shoved the first one in my desperation so hard that it had gone over the extractor claws and it wouldn't come out. And there am I digging with my sheath knife trying to get this spent round out of my gun. Meanwhile, some awful swearing behind my right elbow. Our geologist had got out his Colt 45 revolver and got ready to fire it by putting some rounds into it, and he found that he'd brought the wrong size ammunition. And he was stuffing it in the back of the revolver and it was falling out the front. So our natives saved the day. A magnificent old bloke came out from the village with wild boar's tusks through his nose sideways and all that, and through our natives who interpreted for him, he said, "Look, some of my boys are a bit excited about you trying to come through the village. We've never seen anyone like you before and we don't like you. However, I'll show you a way around the village," which he did. And so we steamed off over the top of this range, getting into the altitudes where, being straight up from sea level, we began to feel the altitude. Our knees started to sag under us and all that. But we got over the top of the range and a little way down the other side before it got dark and camped. Another thing that the old boy had told us was, we'll send a message on, and the whole of the Baliem River Valley, which you had to traverse, we'll stay on the left-hand bank and you stay on the right-hand bank, and you won't see anybody. And they did this. Nobody passed us with a message, but they knew all about it down in the Baliem Valley when we got there. And it was only the first time that we saw these natives apparently radio things to each other by some kind of thought transference. There were no smoke signals or anything like that, no drums, they just knew. And so we headed up the Great Baliem Valley, which is a big valley. It's a bigger river than anything we've got in Australia. It's about the size of the Clutha in New Zealand. And it's only one branch of the main Baliem, which is more like the Mississippi than anything else. You get tremendous water flow in New Guinea because of all the rain. So we headed up this valley, and it was very interesting. A lot of it was terribly muddy, and some of it was pretty difficult. That, by the way, is a pig which one of our natives, who we called the Irishman, had brought along, as well as his wife and son. And I was allowed to carry the pig. So we were a happy family party. And we toggled along up the Barliam Valley. And there's a picture of the scrap that we had with us. That's a shotgun I'm holding in my left hand. And Dave Cooper didn't have a firearm, so he's taken photos. Doesn't look very impressive, and it wasn't really very impressive. Now, the big thing about the Barliam Valley and any of the other rivers in that part of New Zealand is the mud. It'll pull the boots off your feet anytime, and it makes the going very, very difficult and slow. And for instance, we had a whole day wading through water which was just ankle deep, and the bottom underneath was quite hard for a change. It wasn't mud. But where do you sit down or lie down? Or where do you light a fire and cook your tucker in that sort of country? We found that there were quite a few small trees and shrubs growing up through the water, like mangroves, and we were able to pull enough of them out and make a heap and get on top of it to camp the night. Our natives showed us how to do it, of course. And we finally got right up to the head of the West Barliam and crossed it. You see, it's just a little mountain stream at this stage. The only significant thing that happened crossing the West Barliam, well, two significant things happened. One was we went to wash our dishes and things in the morning after breakfast, and we couldn't get them clean because of all the dirty gold that panned into the bottom of them. Gold and mercury. So we took note of this. We didn't want to load ourselves up with any because we were already carrying as much as we could. And it's there. That's the place we go to get some gold. I'll tell you freely. The other thing that happened was, as soon as we got to the other side of the Barliam, we met a mob of 18 natives travelling the other way. They had kept to their side of the river, and we hadn't seen anything of them until we crossed. Because they knew all about us, although they were coming the other way. And we said, thank you very much, and ta-ta, and went up the range, and got on top of this mountain range at about 13 or 14,000 feet. And it was very cold, and it started to sleet and hail. Now, natives had no clothes, they haven't invented clothes. And they sat down, and we said to the head bloke, why are you sitting down? Oh, he said, we're going to die. So we put our little tent. For the six of us, we had a two-man tent, and we pulled it over the top of it and put stones around the edges, and I lit our precious kerosene primus and shoved it in there going flat out with the natives, and they were very, very happy. Anyway, we got to a mission station about halfway to our objective called Ilaga, and there the missionary made us really welcome, and we changed our native carriers for another lot because the lot we were with had really come with us not to help us so much as to get through to Ilaga under the protection of our guns, because without this arrangement to stay on opposite sides of the river, the Ilaga Valley was a very dangerous place. So they said thank you very much and goodbye, and we got another lot, and away we went. And we bought a blick of rice from the missionary. Now, a blick is 10 kilograms, 22 pounds. But what the missionary's wife said was a blick is what the Great Wall of China is built of. A blick. Well, we kept going, and We were getting above the bush line now, into the moss forest first and then above the bush line. And in the moss forest, the native tracks are very well laid out. The trouble is you can't walk on the ground because the vegetation is just too thick. So you walk along branches and you hop onto another branch and you walk along it and you make your way on branches. And it's quite well signposted. It looks like this. It doesn't matter which way up you look at it, it looks the same. And it's just too thick to get through at ground level. So the native tracks are signposted. And the other sign that you're on the track or off it, where the track is, the long wet moss that grows on all the branches has been polished off by people's feet. So you walk along the bare branches. As it happened, with my pack on, I was the heaviest man who'd been along those tracks in 5,000 years. So guess who all the branches broke for? I got quite expert at falling comfortably. Well, we got to the vicinity of the Carstensz Range. At that stage we'd run out of tracks. We were above the tree level and fighting our way through subalpine scrub, rather like the Tasmanian subalpine scrub, or walking over button grass plains, jumping from button to button and trying to miss the water in between. When we came to a vertical cliff, the button grass was still growing up the cliff and you could walk up on the sides of the buttons. It's a very, very wet country. And we got quite close to our mountains. There they are. This is the great north wall of the Carstensz Gebirge. It marks the place where the whole of New Guinea has split and sheared along the crest of the mountains, so that we came across recently melted glacier valleys where the lower part of the valley had been displaced about 2 or 3 miles from the upper part. A complete discontinuity. This is the great transcurrent fault that runs right round the Pacific. And there we were, sitting on top of it. So we found a good place to collect our airdrops, right under the north wall. And we, various parties of us went off two by two to find a way up the wall. And one party did find a way up the wall, which was used later to get access to our big peak. And Duncan Dow, the geologist, and I stayed behind and got ready to receive the airdrops. And we built bonfires out of wood and thatched over them to keep the rain off, and had everything ready. And sure enough, at the appointed time, we heard a drone of an aircraft, and there, away and away off, was a DC-3 approaching us, all according to plan. And we lit the fires and columns of smoke shot up in the air, and the DC-3 got closer and closer, and then the clouds moved aside a bit, and the pilot could see the mountains in front of him, which were a mile or two beyond us, of course, which were above his ceiling. His DC-3 wasn't in very good nick. And he turned around and fled. And if I'd had an anti-aircraft gun, I think I might have got my supply. Well, there we were. There was only one thing we could do, which was to get back home before we ran out of food. We were getting very short already. We were expecting to get food out of the air. And so we gathered ourselves together, left a lot of stuff behind, and turned around and tracked our way back the way we'd come. And we were very, very hungry. And it's amazing how cold you get when you're hungry. we weren't comfortable at all. And we had 1 tin of sanitarium nut meat per day for the 6 of us, and in the evening we would open the tin and cut it into 6 slices, and then we'd hooze it. I would pick up a slice and I'd say to someone else who was sitting with his back to me and couldn't see the slices, "Whose is this?" And he'd say, "Oh, that's Phil Temple's." And it'd go on like that, and everybody got a slice and nobody could complain that there was any unfairness about it. And then we got back to Ilaga, and a native came running down the hill saying, "Quick, quick, they're on the radio for you." So I sprinted up this jolly hill, and by the time I got to the top I couldn't talk on the radio, I was puffing so hard. But anyway, now that we'd come back and we're getting out, everybody was very happy to give us aeroplanes to get out with, and we got out and we had a great feed which nearly killed us, and got back to Australia as quick as we could with our tail between our legs. And I was very busy with JIB, Joint Information Bureau, the military intelligence people in Australia, giving interviews and writing reports on for them, because they had no information at all about this place where, who knows, it's awfully close to Australia. And I was in the middle of all this and back at work too, when I got a message from Heinrich Harrer. Remember Heinrich Harrer, 7 years in Tibet?
Yep.
The man who made the first ascent of the north wall of the Eiger. And he said, we're coming out to Australia and New Guinea in the next couple of weeks to have a crack at the Carstensz, and would you mind giving us some information? So we got Heinrich out to Sydney, and I hired him off to my place to live there, and we gave him all the information we could. We handed over a lot of our supplies, ammunition, shotgun, that sort of stuff. And most important, I supplied him with 2 members of the climbing party, Phil Temple, who'd been with me, and Russ Kippax, the co-founder of the Sydney Rock Climbers. And with a red-headed Dutch geologist from up there, they went and climbed the Carstensz Pyramid using our route that we'd discovered. So our expedition wasn't such a terrible failure. It turned out to be a good reconnaissance expedition for the successful one. And we're all very happy. Now, one of those expeditions that put things wrong for us by their activities in New Guinea was the one with Michael Rockefeller in it, anthropological expedition, and later, just after we'd been up there, Michael Rockefeller and this same red-headed Dutch geologist went out in a canoe off the south coast, got capsized, and the Dutch geologist, wise man, sat on the capsized canoe and waited for someone to come and help him. But Michael, unfortunately, said, "I will go and get help." And he got a couple of empty petrol tins and hopped in the water and started swimming for the shore, and was never seen again.
No, Rockefeller.
Yeah.
Disappeared.
So when Jaap de Vries, who was a Dutch marine biologist with the government up there, came down to Sydney a week or 2 later, I had dinner with him, and I said, "Jaap, what really happened to Michael?" Well, he said, "Well, I think he has been eaten by a shark, but possibly he might have got far enough to be eaten by a saltwater crocodile." And I said, just to keep the conversation going, I said, "But Jaap, what if he got a little bit further into the inland swamps and struck a freshwater crocodile. I says, yup. The Johnson's or freshwater crocodile is harmless. Only twice have I seen a man eaten by one. Well, thank you for listening.
Wonderful.
An amazing adventure. I hope you all realise how lucky you are to have Colin speak to you. He's one of my heroes, and I've been looking forward to hearing of his adventures for a long time.